the meditation of all our heart be acceptable and pleasing in thy sight, O God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. So we have a treat for us today. Let me unmute our speaker here. And because it's Black History Month, and there's also just a lot going on, I thought it would be interesting to hear from one of our church members and to kind of do a little interview, a Q&A. And so that's why it's exciting. Here, Mark, can you hit the got it so we can see the screen?
I'm not
Oh, okay. So anyway, hopefully this will work. I asked her to be over Zoom so that logistically it would be a little better, but hopefully all the technology will work and we can make this happen. But I just want to introduce our senior warden, Nancy Duranteau. So good morning, Nancy. Thank you for being willing to do this. And so first, I wanted to ask you, what first brought you to St. A's, and then why did you stay?
Well, first I have to say, Father Dallin, I hope I can live up for billing of the community. And so I'm going to do my best to do that. But so to start with my story and how I came here to St. Augustine's, I want to say maybe 15, 17 years ago that I grew up Episcopalian. That was my grandparents were Baptist, but Episcopal faith was my tradition. And when I moved here from New York, I looked for an Episcopal church, and what I encountered it's an unnamed parish, but I joined, and at the time I was caring for my mom. And when we walked into the parish, I think it was around Christmas Eve, every head turned and looked at us. And I just thought, this is not, because we were the only two Blacks, I want to say, walking into the parish. And so I just felt at that moment that this is not an experience that I want, being new to an environment and wanting to feel a little bit more welcomed. So I actually then changed and joined St. Paul's AME, where I was there for a while. And then I would say that some things started happening in the church, and I just felt like, let me see if I can find somewhere else. So with my mom in tow, we started visiting different parishes. And so at that point, I thought, let me just check back with the Episcopal, parishes in the community, because I'd only visited that one with that experience. I stopped by one of the parishes, again, to be unnamed, and they said, why don't you try St. Augustine's, right? Because it's a diverse community. I don't know that they even told me that at the moment, that it was a diverse community. But when we had been going to different churches, and when we actually got to, and my mom had Alzheimer's, and so the way she would show up at different churches was different. But when we got to St. Augustine's, when we walked in the door, we were really greeted in an amazing way. I can still remember Joseph Dashiell. I think he greets every visitor who comes in. So I remember Joseph. And we sat down, and as we were going through the service, my mom looked around and said, this is a beautiful, wonderful church, right? And so in that moment, I think that was also what touched my spirit, because she had really been unsettled in most churches. And so that's what brought me here. And then I'm going to say what kept me here was the diversity of the parish, the music, the traditions, the warm feeling of family. And like I said, I've been here 15 years ever since. So that's what brought me to St. Augustine's. The rich history as well was really enticing. And that's really what keeps me here too. Any questions about that? Anything you want me to?
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I was going to ask you my next question. Who are some of the mentors that had guided you in your life, and what were the characteristics they had that really helped you?
Yeah, I'm going to start from probably the latest and go back historically to the first one. So the most recent one, I'm going to have to call it, I don't know that she's on here today, but it's someone who's here at this and comes and joins our parish from time to time. She used to be a really active member. She was a senior warden here at one point. But really, I would say it was a connection that I just looked at her as someone who I aspired to be like, who I admired in terms of her faith, how she showed up in the church. And so I'm going to call her name, and it's Diane Audrick Smith. And so she is someone who I have the utmost, I'm going to say, admiration and appreciation for. And what it is that really draws me and to look at her as a mentor is that she is someone, I'm going to say, who's grounded in her faith, who is also someone in the work setting, in the work environment. She brings professionalism to everything that she does. She's eloquent the way she speaks. And in my humble opinion, she seems unflappable. So in the midst of strife and chaos, she always comes across and delivers a really powerful message and is a great communicator. So those are the characteristics that have really just drawn me to her. Um, she was a senior warden before my first, I'm going to say, I don't know if I'll say my first assignment or appointment as senior warden. So she preceded me. And so I was able to watch her as a senior warden and see how she showed up. And she was, so that's Diane. And I know many of you know her. Some of you may not know her because she moved to Ohio and that's where she is now. But she is a wonderful human being. So that's number one. Next, I'm going to speak about my mom. And, who doesn't talk about their mom if you've got a great mom being a mentor? Clearly, it's someone who's there for you from the very beginning. And I look at my mom because I think of her really, truly, she was a trailblazer. She she chose a path when African American women she was born in 1923. So at that time, there weren't very many African American women who were going to college and then also choosing professions that were outside of being a teacher or a nurse. And that's where she was being directed. But she said she was, yeah, the sight of blood scared her. So she ended up choosing a profession as a dietitian and a nutritionist. And when going to college, she went to Kansas State University. And at the time, she was not able to live on campus because she was African American. So she had to live off campus and walk onto campus. She encountered a professor when she got a C grade because my mom she always she believed in excellence. So that's one of her traits and characteristics was always demonstrate excellence, do your best. And when she got a C and felt like she had an A, she confronted or approached the professor and he told her basically, you'll never get anything above a C because C is for colored, right? And so she just battled through that and just persevered. And then as I mentioned, she had Alzheimer's. And so even through living through Alzheimer's, she never gave up the essence of who she was never left. So her spirit never left her. She always had that. Her neurologist, when we went to UCSF, and that was before I was working there, had basically said that she was one of the patients he most enjoyed seeing because he could look at her and just see what she was like, when she was a little girl or when she was 13, because her personality never left. And so that's another trait is that she was really always authentic and just true to who she was through everything that she did. So then the third person I'm going to mention is my grandmother. And my grandmother was also a mentor, another family member. Of course, she also guided my mom. But it's the same is true. My grandmother was born in 1900, and she as well went to college, which was really unusual back then as well. So she received her college degree in Mississippi, and then she also was a teacher for a little bit. But I lived with my grandparents because when my mom and dad divorced for a little bit, I lived with them for like 3 or 4 years. And so in that period, my mom had sent, I guess, the money to get me a doll. And my grandmother took me to the department store to purchase a doll. And there were all these dolls. And I picked out a little doll. It was a little white doll they had all these wonderful things that went along with it, like soap and a comb and all these other things. And I went to my grandmother and I said, this is the doll that I want. And she had a little black doll in her arms. And she said, wouldn't you like this doll? And I said, no, I want this doll, because the little black doll didn't have anything. She just was pretty plain and basic. And she just laid her down and her eyes would blink, and that was pretty much it. And so my grandmother asked me again, and I said, no, I don't want that doll. And she said, okay, I'll get this doll for me and you get this doll. So when we got home, my grandmother proceeded, well, I started unwrapping the doll and playing with all of her little things, her little bottle and her little comb and her hair and the whole thing. And I ran downstairs to my grandmother and I said, look at all these things this wonderful doll has. And my grandmother was sitting at the sewing machine. And so my grandmother said, because I think she had a change. My grandmother said, I'm making my doll like lots of outfits. So she was sewing her dresses. She said, I'm making her a dress. I'm making her all these different things. And I said, can you make those for my doll? And my grandmother said, no, I can't make those for your doll. I'm making these for this doll and I'm going to name her Nancy. And I said, well, I want my doll to be Nancy. And she said, no, your doll can't be named Nancy because she doesn't look like you. And she said, so this is little Nancy. And so she proceeded to give all of her attention to the little doll Nancy. And of course, I then said, well, I want little Nancy as well. And she said, okay, well, let's trade. Okay, so she gave me little Nancy. And that became, I'm going to say, my favorite doll forever. And then I never saw the other little doll again, needless to say. So that's just something about my grandmother. What I admire is their way that she taught and instilled in me a pride for my skin color, for who I am as an individual. And both my mother and grandmother, it was about never let anyone define who you are. But if you strive for excellence, let yourself, be the gauge of your own character and what's possible for you. So those are the three people that I will name as mentors. And I know that was a long answer, but those are the people that I hold dear to my heart.
No, I think that's a great answer. Thank you for sharing. And one thing that we highlighted last year in February when I did the Q&A with Dr. Poe was because it's Black History Month, it's nice to celebrate Black people that aren't going to be on TV, that you're not going to hear about in the news, that aren't like famous and known, but people who were amazing and helpful and had a good impact on you. So I think that was a great, perfect answer. So you mentioned you work at UCSF. Can you just briefly share what you do, and then what has your experience been like in the corporate environment as a Black woman? And kind of what advice would you give to like a 22-year-old Black woman about to like pursue a career in corporate America?
Yeah, thanks. So my experience, so at UCSF, I oversee the learning and organization development function. And so I'm the chief learning officer. And so that function, what we do is it's the training really arm for the organization. And we focus primarily on staff, but we also support faculty and learners. We support all faculty and learners in terms of all the compliance training. We host the system where everything sits in the portal where all of the training sits. But we specifically consult and provide guidance and professional direction for staff and for leaders. And that's where faculty come in, as many of them do lead staff. And so we support them in leadership and management skills. And so we have a team of about, I'd say that we're growing, but 18 to 20 individuals on our team who take on roles in various aspects. We have learning and development consultants. We're looking at bringing on coaches. We've got instructional designers. So that's really the gamut of the individuals that are on our team. And one thing I would say about our team is that we are an amazing group of wonderful, excellent professional individuals. I'm so highly talented, highly skilled, and highly engaged. And that's one of the other things that we do as well, is that we oversee and administer the engagement survey. And engagement in terms of measuring not just satisfaction with the organization, but how much are you, I'm going to say, attached or aligned to the values and the work of the organization and the mission. And so it's the sense that I'm engaged because I feel like it's a mutual exchange. So I am contributing to the organization, but the organization is also feeding me and helping me develop and to help me grow. And I feel a connection because it's a rewarding experience being here. And so that's how we define engagement for the most part. And so we have a survey that we administer annually. And I bring the survey up and I bring engagement up because it was, I stepped into this role about 3 years. No, actually, I stepped into this role in 2016. At UCSF, I was at UC Berkeley prior to here, and then a number of other places before my career as well. But when I stepped into the chief learning officer role, I just want to say as well, and I was able to step in this role really due to another person of color. And it was my predecessor who is, I won't say, who is Egyptian. And I had been with the organization for about a year, and she did not let anyone know, including myself, that she was retiring. And she was telling me that she wanted me to step up while she was on vacation into the role. And I did so. And then she would get really upset when I wasn't doing things exactly the way she wanted me to do them, or she'd say, you're going to need to speak to the cabinet and they're going to ask you these questions. And I'm thinking, you're only going to be gone on vacation for 3 weeks. Do I need to know all this stuff? And so as it turned out, she announced that she was retiring. And so as she retired, she recommended that I assume the interim role and then apply for the position as a whole. So that's how I moved into it. But I look at her, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of as a sponsor. And so it's really important to have sponsors. And those are people who can often see what your value is and who you are, despite how you're packaged. And when I say packaged, I'm going to say despite the color of my skin, or despite my gender or any of those other, external factors that often don't allow people to see leaders. And so she was that for me. And so I am also grateful for her. I will also say, although I'm on camera, I probably should not say this, but I don't know that she doesn't know this as well. But she did not, a lot of people did not appreciate her style or how she led in the organization. So as I stepped into the role, there was a lot of, I'm going to say, the shadow that she had left that people were expecting to me, but I led in a completely different style. So that's that piece. What I mentioned earlier about the engagement survey, and the reason I bring this up is because in the engagement survey, when I took this role on, and the engagement survey had been going on for since 2011, but it was in 2018, and Gallup, it's a Gallup instrument that we use. In the analysis, what we saw, and what I'm going to say, what I reported to the chancellor in the cabinet, which I don't know had been reported before, was that we saw disparities in groups. So we saw that the environment was not fostering engagement for Blacks and for the Latinx community in the same way that it was fostering engagement for whites and Asians. We also saw some other disparities around those who are non-represented versus those who are represented. So those who are in unions, the environment wasn't fostering engagement as much as well, despite the fact that the majority of our staff and our community is unionized. And then also around those who are large spans of controls, meaning they had lots of, a leader has a lot of direct reports. And then lastly, managers were showing higher engagement than non-managers. But the clear, I'm going to call like elephant in the room, was really calling out the race piece, right? The fact that it didn't sponsor, we weren't fostering engagement to the same degree. And I'm going to say, as a testament to the leadership of UCSF, the chancellor, and the former CEO, we're now in transition, who was Mark Larritt, when I presented those results to the cabinet and the chancellor, what the chancellor said in response when I called out the race piece was, "You've got my attention." And I would say from 2018, we had a journey where we then we did focus groups to understand what are the issues that are creating this disparity. And then we created an index with Gallup separate than our engagement survey that's about belonging. And we call it the belonging index. So the three things that we saw that were issues were, one, that it's difficult to navigate the organization because it's such a large organization. And this is particularly true, and I'm going to just focus on the Blacks and Latinx community now because of the Black History Month and what we're talking about today. Is that one, it's that if you're not in that inner circle, if you don't have sponsors, if you don't have mentors, if you don't have managers who can see you, then you don't get the news, the word, the understanding of how do you navigate, where do you check in. So that was one piece. The other piece is that is having a manager who is an advocate for you, someone who does speak about you in other meetings, who represents, who will support your work, who will highlight your work. And then the third piece that we called out was that there were clear microaggressions, specifically against Blacks and Latinx, and that was really the area that was the most challenging. And when I say microaggressions, I don't know if everyone's familiar with microaggressions, but it's those little things that people say or do to you that add up. So in one sense, it may not be a big deal, but it may be someone coming up to me and saying to me, "Oh, wow, your hair looks really interesting. How do you do that?" Right? And so on face value, It's nothing that you could say is discrimination, but it's those little things that add up over time. So there was a preponderance of that impacted African Americans. And so we started an action plan that's specific about that, and we've been doing that. And I want to say that that preceded the George Floyd incident. And so when the George Floyd incident happened, even more resources, I would say, and we created an entire priority in the organization that's an anti-racism priority that's sponsored by the organization. So I do a lot of work in that areas. I'm in a lot of meetings, task forces to support how do we create a more equitable environment. As much as I can, when individuals reach out to me, will try to meet with them and mentor them and have conversations, specifically, women or young Black women, and even men or anyone, because I feel like that's part of my duty and my obligation. So I feel like I got lost somewhere in that response, Father Dahlin. But so that's what I do at work. And so my advice, so you mentioned like, what's my advice for women? And I also speak at the School of Medicine's Leadership Development Program. And what I share to everyone is there is what I would say. And I think it's so important to we who are African American, because I struggle with it as well growing up, is that we often can give our best and we do our best, but because of the stereotypes, the bias, the racism, that we're not seen, and it can become very demoralizing. And so when that happens, we can have a propensity to stop and to no longer pursue excellence or pursue being our best. And so my advice is to never let that infiltrate, because what happens is once that happens, then people point at you and say, oh, well, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, or you're not this, you're not that, because they've ignored your greatness today. And so it's always do your best, be your best. And if you find yourself in a situation with a leader or with an organization where they are not seeing who you are, it's go somewhere. And so do your best. And so you can get out of there and people can still attest to what a great character and who you are and how you work. And then find a place where people can see you. So seek individuals, seek organizations, seek a department where you can be seen. That's but always do your best. True to yourself.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I can relate to that just as a priest, because I've been at 2 churches now where I'm the only clergy person on staff. And one thing I've had to learn is like, I gotta find mentors. I need people that I can call and say, hey, I'm dealing with this, and people with lots of experience and mentors and stuff. I think that's crucial in any job, in any situation. I'm glad you highlighted that. So that was great. So shifting gears a little bit, you're starting your 3rd year as senior warden. And you claim final year, but we'll see. I'm just kidding. What are you most excited about at St. Augustine's going forward?
I think what excites me about St. Augustine's is the same thing that's excited me from the very beginning, and it really does tie into the history and the mission of it being a parish that is really about recognizing and valuing and the African diaspora. And so in terms of creating unity, being able to be a diverse parish and community, and then also to honor our history, which includes some, social justice and activism in terms of really making the community a better place for all. So I'm excited about the history that St. Augustine's has, and I'm also excited about taking that history and continuing to move it forward, especially given all the things that are happening in the world today, that seem like they're about trying to turn back the clock to a time where things weren't, so where there was an awareness and to erase the reality that we currently have.
That's great. Thank you. I hope we're all excited about those same things and more. So thank you. And kind of wrapping up, this has been a really good, but who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl today?
Oh my God. Well, how many? I'm almost
I loved asking you because I feel like
I
you don't care about sports that much.
well, I was going to say I don't really even know who's playing in the Super Bowl.
That's great. And
That's a hard one.
this has been
Hard one.
it's the Rams or the Bengals.
Okay. Let's go for the Rams. They're close at home, right? Yeah.
All right, she picks the Rams. That's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. But this has been so great because what's also fun is just knowing that every single person in our church is doing all these amazing things out in the world. And so it's just fun to hear what you're doing and all the work you're doing at your job. And it seems like it's impactful. And if you guys can figure out how to end microaggressions in a corporate environment, let's write a book and scale that, and because the whole world needs that right now. So. But we'll keep praying for you because, like you said, pursue excellence, and that can get really tiring sometimes, and it can be hard to continuously pursue excellence, especially, you're trying to combat racism and microaggression. That's that would be incredibly frustrating. So we'll keep you in our prayers. And thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I do. I just want to say that I'm really humbled that you would make my life or you would speak to me and for a sermon, and that I'm honored and again really just grateful that I am in this position as senior warden here at St. Augustine's. And so, thank you for your leadership, Father Dallin, and thank you all of my church family for being the amazing, beautiful people that you are that inspire and lead me where I can receive life mentors, right here in our beautiful family. So thank you all. Love you.